Hey guys, Mike from Magnanimous here, and we're back live from Studio One for another build of the day. In case you guys are new to this series, this is a build up that we're doing every day, Monday through Friday. We'll be streaming live at 5 p.m. and highlighting various pieces of our gear, putting it all together in a build, and talking about why we use it in that particular way. If you guys have a build that you're interested in seeing, please comment below and let me know what you guys want to see. I want to highlight the gear that you're interested in. Today's build is actually one that was asked for last week, and so we're going to be taking a look at the Canon 1DX Mark II and building it out for a cinema build. If you guys have questions along the way, please comment below, let me know, and at the end of the video we'll have a Q&A section where I'll answer those the best I can and go from there. Without further ado, let's look at the pieces that we're working with today. As we mentioned, our camera for today is going to be the Canon 1DX Mark II. In case you guys are new to this camera, it is a wonderful DSLR, features a full-frame CMOS sensor, capable of shooting 4K video up to 60 frames a second, or 1080 up to 120 frames per second, and still images up to 14 shots in RAW and 16 shots in JPEG per second, up to 170 total shots for RAW, or if you're doing JPEG, it'll just keep going continuously, 16 a second nonstop. Packs a huge punch, easily finds its home for sports photography or live performance photography or anything that requires a massive shutter rate. As I can kick this guy on and just give you guys a listen of the shutter. This is at high speed, full auto. You guys can see it just keeps going. So you capture as many frames as you need throughout all of that. For sports and stuff, it's super cool because if action's happening, you just hold down your shutter, make sure you're in focus and everything, and then you can actually pick out the exact moment within that second of time that you want the shot to be, which can make the difference between a critical shot being perfect or it being off by just a little bit. You capture all of that with this guy here. We mentioned that it has some robust video capability, shooting 4K 60, and one of the few Canon cameras that features 1080 up to 120 frames per second, making it a really good option for video as well. I would say it really finds its home on gimbals. It has a touchscreen here on the back, so when paired with L-series lenses, all you have to do is tap where you want to focus, and it very quickly and easily finds that. There's a video on our Instagram page you guys can check out if you want to see more about its dual pixel autofocus, but suffice to say that it's very, very fast and really reliable. So you can pair this with a simple 24 prime, throw it on the Ronin S, and have a really quick and easy 4K 60 high-speed solution to pair with either a C300 Mark II, C500 Mark II, or anything like that. Internal, it shoots in a motion JPEG, which does render fairly large files, so just be aware that you're likely going to have a lot of cards on hand, especially if you're shooting that 4K 60. But it is very reliable in that sense. Won't overheat, things like that. The trade-off, though, is that it does tap out at 422 8-bit internal and really does not feature a lot of external recording modes because you can't output 4K. It's only going to output 1080. So it is fairly limited in that sense. Not to say that we can't scale it out for a cinema build like we're going to do today, but just know that you are stepping into some limitations. It's not going to have a wide dynamic range, something probably around 11 to 12 stops. It's just not quite going to hold up to some of its counterparts like the C200 or C500 Mark II. It also won't feature any log profile because it is one of Canon's DSLRs, so it doesn't have a log mode. So for your widest dynamic range, I recommend shooting in wide DR, which is going to give you the flattest profile that you can get in this camera. You can go into that color profile and fine-tune it a little bit, drop your contrast a little bit, and try and cheat a bit more dynamic range out of it, but if you run it side by side to a higher-end professional camera, you're certainly going to find its limitations. But not to say that if this is the only camera you have and you need to shoot cinema with it, you can't accomplish it. One of the really unique things about this camera is that while it has a full-frame sensor, when you shoot in 4K, it actually crops the sensor slightly to something closer to that of a Super 35, meaning that we can use a lot more lenses than just our full frame, which brings us to the lens that we're pairing with it today. Today we'll be using the Canon 30-105 Cinema Zoom, which is a T2.8. It's a bit of a beefy guy here, so we are going to run a rail system for a lens support, but this is a phenomenal lens. If you guys are familiar with Canon's photo lens series, I always refer to this as the cinema equivalent to the 24-105. It's basically a jack-of-all-trades lens where you can shoot on one lens all day without having to do any lens swaps, because you have that nice wide option at 30, but you can get a really long telephoto shot at 105. Really useful lens, especially for documentary work, things like that, where you don't want to have to do lens swaps. I also love shooting with a cinema zoom when I can, because it's more cost effective for an entire range. In comparison, our C&E Prime kit, which would basically give you all these focal lengths, is actually about $50 more a day for all 6 lenses than one cinema zoom, which gives you all focal lengths in one. So you could save a little bit money by going with this guy instead of a full fleet of primes, and you don't have to do any lens swaps. Keeps it much cleaner and smoother with that one lens on there. Then, to round out the cinema capabilities of the 1DX, we're going to pair with the Small HD 502 monitor. And this helps in one of 2 ways. First, it's going to be a good focus pulling monitor because we can run focus peaking on it. It has a nice bright 1080p display for us. 2, it's going to give us an SDI output. One of the cool features of the 502 is internal cross conversion. So with a DSLR like the 1DX Mark II, I can run an HDMI input into it and then an SDI output to go to a larger production monitor, a Teradek, or something like that. Today we'll be using that to run a signal out of it to our large Flanders monitor so that you guys can see the image that I'm seeing on camera. Then, to give us just a little bit more cinematic flair, we're going to pair with our good old ARRI MMB1 matte box here and a 3mm blue True Streak filter. If you saw our anamorphic episode that we did, you saw that anamorphic flare, that blue line across the frame. Well, the 3mm blue streak recreates that for spherical lenses, so you can cheat that lens flare that you typically get with anamorphic to give you a bit of a more cinematic feel to it. And we'll be using that just to round out our setup for today and give it a little bit more character than it would have on its own. Altogether, those will pair to kind of round out the 1DX Mark II and really give us a full cinema build with it. Why don't we go ahead and switch over to the top down, and I'll show you guys how we'll start putting all of this together. To start, kind of the core build of our setup is going to be our Red Rock quick release system. This is honestly one of our staple quick releases because it is very, very versatile. We'll adapt this based on the camera rig that you're using to establish the proper rod height. I preemptively tested this setup and established the proper size for all of this, so we're good to go. But if we're using like a RED camera, for instance, where our mount sits slightly differently, we'll raise this rod clamp and adjust all of that prior to your shoot, so you guys are all good to go. So this guy I know is all set up. I can go ahead and just get my camera mounted on the camera mounting plate. One thing with the Red Rock quick release and DSLRs that I always like to make sure I do is I'm going to mount my camera as furthest forward on the mounting plate as I can. That way, when I go to run a follow focus and a lens support, I can make sure that I have enough room on my rods to properly mount that. You'll notice if I run my plate all the way on the back like this, once I got it onto my quick release, I have a lot of distance between my lens mount and my rods. And if my lens was put there, my zoom ring and my iris ring at least, but possibly my focus ring as well, would all be on this inside distance and really is not ideal for the build. So what we'll do is instead cheat our camera as far forward on the plate as we can. Like so. Then, when we attach it to our quick release, we're sitting nice and flush up to that rod clamp, and we'll have plenty of room to mount our follow focus and our lens support on the front. Before we secure camera though, we do want to go ahead and throw our tripod plate on the bottom here. It's just easier to do with camera off. Not that you couldn't do it with the camera, but I don't have an AC today, and it's usually easier to do if you have an AC, so one person can hold it while the other mounts the plate. Once we have that secured, we can go ahead and attach our camera and lock him down on the plate. We'll mount our rods and everything on the tripod, but we'll go ahead and get our monitor set up and ready to go. That way we can just set it onto the cold shoe on top. Instead of running an articulating arm today, I'm going to run a ball mount. Gives us a little bit more versatility than what just a cold shoe would do, so that I can tilt my monitor and adjust it a little bit on the fly without having to run a full articulating arm, because one of the things you'll notice with the 1DX, it doesn't have a lot of mounting points on it, so it can make mounting a bunch of accessories a little bit challenging. So we'll use the ball mount today instead. I'm going to run my cable around it to start. That's just going to help us cable that cable a little easier. When we go to mount it on camera, we won't be having to fight and coil all that ourselves. We can go ahead and switch over to our tripod now. I'll get my camera set up on there, and then to start, we will run our 15 mil rods. As always, you'll want to size these out for your specific setup. Every setup's going to require a different size. In this case, you'll notice my rods don't do pass-through, so I only have them out the front. So I can't use extremely long rods, as they'd get too long in the front and would get in my shot or something like that. So I've sized these out perfectly, so they're just going to be as long as my setup needs. It's always just important to think about your build and what all you're attaching and what size you're going to need. Whenever I'm attaching a cinema zoom, I always start by putting my lens support roughly on my rods, somewhere where I think the support's going to mount. And I'll grab my 30-105. So you'll see this small foot here at the bottom, which has a 1/4-20 mount. That's where our lens support is going to mount, and that's what's going to take the weight of this lens off of our EF mount. So I'm actually going to thread this end here into the bottom of my lens. I'll leave that on for now. I'll go ahead and mount my lens, but my hand in front stays here supporting my lens so that none of that weight is actually coming onto my EF mount here. Then I'll just line up my support. I'll switch my hand over and thread him into the bottom. Then we just lock everything down, and my lens is good to go. Then I'll throw my monitor on top, which is just as simple as mounting it up and running our HDMI down. I already mounted our battery into the 1DX, but one of the bonuses for a cinema build is uniquely with DSLRs, the battery side mounts here, so you don't have to deconstruct the whole rig to mount a battery. If you guys saw my A7R4 build, I actually had to slide camera forward to pop the battery in, and that's just because the battery sits underneath the camera where it mounts. So this makes battery swaps very quick and painless, and it stays out of the way. It's just easier and faster to make those swaps. Now we'll go ahead and throw our matte box on the front. And I've already sized out the proper 114 millimeter reduction ring here so that it's the right size of the front of the lens. And this is something that you guys had pointed out in a previous video where the matte box had not quite lined up perfectly. One of the things you'll notice here is that my lens is actually sitting slightly too tall for my matte box. It's about maybe 1 millimeter too tall, and that's a product of my camera mounting with only one mounting screw, so it has a little bit of flex there and then a little bit of flex in our EF mount. So I'm just going to loosen my lens support here and drop the lens down a little bit so it hits that right size. And it's just a matter of managing that flex and that back single quarter 20 lens mount, or I'm sorry, camera mounting screw. And then we should, once we get that sized right, be able to slide our matte box nice and smoothly on. This is one of the downsides to using DSLRs. Everything doesn't sit as true as a camera that uses 2 mounting screws. And so occasionally there's a little bit of play that you just have to work out in order to get everything to mount. I don't know why he's giving me so much trouble though. There we go. I'll tighten that down, and then on the side of our matte box here, there's a screw that we can tighten down to secure the reduction ring around our lens there. From here, I'm just going to throw our blue streak filter in. The blue streak filter can go into the rotating stage of the matte box, and you can actually rotate it to adjust the angle of the flare if you wanted it to go diagonal or something like that. For our purposes today, I'm looking for the traditional horizontal flare to emulate an anamorphic lens. So I'm just going to drop it on here. If we want to cut to the top down, I can show you guys how I load this into the filter tray. Anytime I'm using filters, I always make sure I have a puffer on hand because I don't want dust or debris getting onto the front of my filter. And then I always make sure that I'm handling my filters from the edges. You'll notice my fingers are only on the edge and I'm not wrapping around the glass or anything. That's going to help manage fingerprints and smudges on the glass. It's fun if you look at the blue streak, you'll notice that it's actually a series of vertical blue lines, and those blue lines are going to actually create the flare that we're looking for from the lens. To fit it into the matte box, it's just as simple as lining up the back edges into the corners here. I'm going to set it down, and I'm just going to pull out on this little piece, and the spring lock is going to latch it into place. Once I have it latched, we can then take it back over to our matte box and throw it on. And we're just going to slide this into the side here, and then use this red twist lock at the top to lock it in place. That secures it so that even when I pan or tilt or things like that, my or the filter in that stage doesn't move or anything like that. Keeps it nice and clean for us. We can go ahead and boot everything on. And then I'm going to run out our Flanders scientific monitor here so that you guys can get a good image of our streak. Oh, I did forget our follow focus, always an important addition. Let's go ahead and throw him on. This is our good old ARRI MFF2 follow focus. I've talked about it a lot. That's because it's my favorite follow focus we have. And that's just because it's very, very adaptable. I can move everything around and adjust it as needed. And it's just a super quick, easy to use follow focus that works with just about any setup out there. So I'm just going to line that up real quick. And lock him down in place. Check to make sure he's good. And then with the 30-105, I do always like to use, there's a little tiny arm that comes in with the lens. There's actually two of them, so you could run one for focus and one for zoom if you needed. Since we're running the follow focus though, I'm going to run this arm in my zoom and thread it in like so. And that just gives me an easier place to do the zoom adjustments from without having to reach all the way to grab the barrel of the lens. And I can make easy adjustments out here, closer to where I'm already pulling my focus from, and I just don't have to move my hands as much. Just makes it a little bit faster and easier to do those zoom adjustments and things on the fly. Then I'm just going to run a hardline SDI from our monitor here to the Small HD 502. One thing I did learn today when we were setting this up, the pass-through signal from the Small HD mirrors the frame rate that your camera is sending it. It basically cross-converts a pass-through. So it's not really changing the signal in any way. Just keep that in mind. I had to adjust my frame rate output a little bit from camera side to make the Flanders like it, so it got a signal that it was happy with. Let me get this in a good position so you guys can see there. And then I'm going to go ahead and move around the frame, and I'll throw a flashlight up so you guys can see that flare. You'll notice you get a really nice long flare there. It's going to stretch a good way throughout the frame, and that's because it's a 3mm streak, so you're getting a good, nice, long flare there. If I'm off center a little bit, I can still get a bit of a prevailing flare that comes in through, even if the light itself is off. So even off axis lights on the edge of frame are still going to play in a little bit. It's going to be really cool for any music video, short film. Night scenes are really, really fun because any street lights, things like that, all are going to get that flare as well. Super, super creative filter to add to any setup, but for the 1DX here, definitely helps kind of up that game just a little bit. This would be my kind of most basic cinema build. We've added a few things specifically to kind of amp up the performance here. The only thing I would stress is that the 1DX is not compatible with all Super 35 lenses. The 30-105 is really unique in that even with the crop of shooting 4K, I can still shoot through it. I would say most Super 35 lenses will be compatible, but if you have a specific lens you're wanting to use, best just to run a test with it to ensure you don't get any vignetting or anything like that. Definitely compatible with any full frame glass, and if you're going to be shooting in 1080, you'll have to use full frame. There is not a way to specifically crop the camera's sensor, which does make it a little limiting. In our cases, we're going for the cinema build, so I'm looking to shoot the highest possible recording I can. We are doing the 4K 60. So we have that little crop so we can take advantage of that and use the better cinema lens there. Let's see if you guys had any questions at all while we were going through.
Just review the camera that we're using.
Yeah, we're just going to run through the build one more time. I'll kind of give you guys a full 360 here. To start, in the back, we have our Canon 1DX Mark II. This is a phenomenal DSLR camera that boasts a massive shutter speed for still photography, shooting up to 14 shots a second in RAW, up to 170 shots continuously, or 16 shots a second in JPEG infinitely without a buffer cap on it. So for sports photography, live performances, things like that, where you're trying to capture every little bit of a moment, super critical for that. Also boasts 4K 60 recording internal and 1080 120 so that you can use it for video very, very easily. I have it paired with our Canon 30-105 cinema zoom. This is one of my favorite cinema zooms from Canon, as it's basically a jack-of-all-trades lens. You can stay on one lens for the entire day without needing to swap because it's a nice fast 2.8 wide open throughout the whole zoom range. Your aperture doesn't shift in any way, and it gives you a wide zoom from 30 all the way to a nice telephoto at 105. I then am running a Small HD 502 monitor on the back here, which is giving us an internal cross conversion, just kind of upping the cinema game of this by giving us an SDI connection so that we can do a long run to Video Village or to a Teradek or something like that, and just expand that out a little bit more. In the front, just to give us a little bit more character, I'm running our ARRI MMB1 matte box. It's a go-to lightweight two-stage matte box, which can hold any 4x5.6 filters. Today we're running a 3mm True Streak filter to give it some cinematic flair. You could easily run ND or something like that, as it is important to note the 1DX Mark II doesn't have internal ND. So if we are looking for that cinema game, a matte box becomes critical just to hold those filters to control that exposure properly. And then, in case you guys are interested on this side, this is the Flanders 21-inch production monitor. It's one of my favorite go-to monitors for Video Village or client setup. because if we rotate to the back, it's got a gold mount battery bracket right on the back, so I can power it off of a brick battery very, very easily. I have an Anton Bauer 190, and this is the same battery that we've been using for every single live setup that we've done. I haven't had to switch it yet, and I think I've got about an hour and 15 minutes of runtime left on it. So it's a really nice runtime. Don't have to really worry about powering it off. I believe you get somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of runtime on one brick battery with this monitor. So you get a nice large amount of power out of it, and you can be nice and mobile with it on wheels without having to tie it to a wall for power. Comes in very, very handy, especially if you're pairing it with a Teradek. We didn't use one today, but I can power that Teradek off of the same brick battery, keeping everything nice and mobile. And that's all of the build that I had for today. If you guys have questions, comment below and we can address those down the line. If there's anything you're wanting to see, let me know. This 1DX build right now was requested last week, and we'll highlight the gear that you one piece, or if there's a full build that you want to see, comment below and let me know, and we'll highlight that down the road. If you guys are looking to stream, we're streaming live from Studio One today, and we have all of the gear in-house to accommodate any streaming that you need to do. We also have a partner at perfectcircle.pro who can not only hook you up with gear, but an operator as well to help with the stream and take the weight off of your back so you can focus on all the creative side of it, and we'll handle the gear and all the computer stuff, make your job super easy. So if you guys are interested in setting up streaming and are a little intimidated, check out perfectcircle.pro and we can help you go ahead and get started. As always, guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll plan to see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. for another build of the day. And that's all I got for today. Take care.